one of the important things that students at OSU go through is the candidacy exam. So, what is your opinion? Like, in your opinion, what is the goal of the candidacy exam, or like, what is your philosophy of the candidacy exam? What do you look for in a candidacy exam? So,
Um, okay, I mean that's definitely, I think, something I've thought a fair amount about. You know, I'll start with my own experience. So, my candidacy exam, it ended up being a little bit uncomfortable, and that I think is by design. So, the kind of what I think generally we're looking for is how your reasoning process is, not whether you can just answer questions, but how you can reason your way to answers, or at least to identifying key factors when you don't know the answer. So, one thing I encourage my students to do is and I do this in our meetings, is practice thinking through things on the board and on your feet. And so that's often why it's uncomfortable, because, it's hard to do. And we don't get a lot of practice with that nowadays in our coursework and stuff. But it's super important, because you use that all the time in collaborative discussions. Like, you're talking with other people informally. Obviously, it's a lot lower stakes, but you need to kind of think things through, be able to think out loud, write things down, draw pictures on the board and stuff like that. So, that part of my own candidacy exam was a little bit uncomfortable, reaching that edge. But, I was able to reason through things enough that obviously I passed.
so when you said like by design, it tends to like push your limits, like just to understand where do you stand at, like what is the edge of your knowledge. This is one part of that.
Yeah, and more to the point is how do you recognize the edge, and when you're at the edge, what do you do? Do you freeze? Do you try to draw some pictures on the board? Maybe go back. What's probably really key is go back to the fundamentals. So you can really get pretty far if you just have a good understanding of undergraduate physics, particularly an intuitive understanding. So I think the ones that are smoother are people that have that, and can kind of, when they reach the edge of their knowledge, they can think through things that way.
So if you can summarize those points you look at in a candidacy exam, what they will be like, the you mentioned like pushing to the limits, or like knowing the edge, and how do you navigate like problems, or like how do you go about solving them, or like how you're
It would be being able to reason through questions from fundamental physics, conservation of energy, electric fields, these kind of things. So, my own candidacy format was different than what we typically do here. So my exam was, it was a written and oral component. Those were a little bit more closely related to my proposed research. And so actually I'm kind of coming around to wanting to emphasize that more, kind of treating it more like a formative assessment. So for example, I'm developing this quantum graduate program, and so thinking about the candidacy exam as part of that. And some other departments take a much more focused view of this. So for example, you could imagine having the paper be a draft of the first 2 chapters of your dissertation. So I kind of like that, because it emphasizes doing a literature search on your topic, which is something that you need to do anyways. And I don't know, to me, it's a much more concrete goal that makes the assessment more meaningful. So, we've been talking about this in our grad studies committee, and it turned out that faculty are open to kind of a wide range of candidacy options.
to change it more toward like the proposal kind of version.
So some people may favor that. Some people like having it be a topic that's somewhat different than what their dissertation research will be. And I think, we're moving in a direction where I think there'll be a menu of choices.
Okay. And since we are talking like about like work and research environment, what is your metric of research and work progress? And sometimes it gets mentioned like the number of working hours. So is the number of working hours one of them, and how do you assess that, or how do you assess in general, like the work progress?
Yeah, so I never keep track of hours. I usually will tell people, graduate school is you get out what you put into it. So, when I was a grad student, I was probably worked at least 80 hours a week. But, I definitely wasn't efficient for 80 hours a week. So one way that I really enjoyed grad school and being around the lab was, having fun with group mates and with other students around the building. So we definitely took, long lunch breaks, walking, this was Santa Barbara, so it was really nice to walk around, like even maybe go to the beach just to look at the ocean for a little bit during the day, take some time, enjoyed the day itself, not just only focus on the work while you're there. So we had a lot of fun as students that I hope to, I hope to maintain in my own group, like just more informal interactions. So at least that's how I kind of didn't feel like I was working, even though I was there for a lot.
I see. But is there of course, if you get to finish an experiment, or like you get to get final results that can go into a paper, then this is a great indicator of your like progress. Mm-hmm. But are there other metrics that you follow in order to like assess, well, this student is doing well, like in terms of progress, and this, well, we may need to push a little bit more? Like, is there other ways that you assess that?
I mean, I wouldn't say there's metrics like I could write down a bulleted list of. I'd say, the characteristics of people that do make progress, one is that you don't work in serial. Serial means one thing only in one line of tasks. So, I encourage people to work in parallel. So, in particular, the parallel task should be something that maybe could solve a problem later on or let you do a better measurement later on. So does this mean like a student is working on like multiple projects at the same time? Or, like they're, like we do, sample preparation, for example. So improving the capability to heat samples in vacuum is something that we often would benefit from. So in experimental work, there's usually kind of improving your experiment and doing measurements. So the more you can work on those at the same time, or bounce back and forth between them. So like, let's say you're waiting for a sample that you ordered and you have a couple weeks. Like if you don't use that time necessarily, just obviously no one's like twiddling their thumbs, but the more extent that you can think ahead and get things in line to do things better in parallel, the more progress you make. So I generally will look for, is someone only working in serial, or are they trying to blend in things in parallel?
And given that, like, I think this is one of the main questions that I would like to actually know your answer about, is like, how do you approach like balancing the quality of the research with the pressure to publish, since you always need to like stay on the track of that? So
yeah, I can't say I have a great balance on that. We're a little bit slow in publishing, but I think at least this came up in my like promotion letters. Like I think in the field, it's recognized that we do careful work and are thorough. So I think that if it's recognized in the field, that definitely is probably more important than having more papers. So also we tend to, that thoroughness is just kind of my own probably personal style that I've encouraged in the group, even though it does slow down publishing. But you get better quality papers. It doesn't mean that we're always publishing in like Science or Nature, but at least wherever we publish, it's going to be a good quality paper.
All right. Last question in this part is, what does work-life balance mean in academia, in your opinion?
Especially for you,
yeah.
Like the graduate studies committee as well. So.
Well, let's see. What do I want to say about that? So first I'll share, I'm a single parent. So I've been a full-time single parent for 10 years now. after I got divorced in 2016. So work-life balance, I think, the hard part about the job is that you could always be working. You're never done. So it's up to you to define boundaries or figure out ways to do what you need to do, but in a way that's sustainable. So, what works for me is, integrating to some extent, at least for now. It's starting to evolve now that my kids are getting older, but when they're young, like I would really have to, like for example, had a lot of childcare duties and things like that. So like I would really have to turn off, at 6 p.m., which is when childcare basically ends, like after school care or things like that. So, I would definitely carve out, just focus time with them. And then maybe I would spend an hour later when they're in bed, kind of catching up on emails or things like that. Nowadays, it's a little bit more flexible, but I still adopt. Like I try to minimize how much time I'm wasting on anything. So at some level, that's maybe to my detriment, but like definitely efficient, and I've had to be efficient to balance all these things. So I'll multitask, or carve out time where I know I have to do an important task where I can focus, and then if I'm watching TV, I'll be watching TV while doing workday requisitions or stuff like that. So,
So how did like being more efficient evolve it from like your PhD up to being a professor, and then like with the childcare and everything? Was there like I don't know, like an evolution in that you actually noticed in terms of like trying? Do you have like a task list
that you go through
oh yeah,
every day?
not necessarily every day, but I'll certainly, I have about 10 task lists for different main projects that I'm involved in. So I'll periodically check with those as a way to kind of catch up on where things are at a higher level. So yeah, I'd say I've continued to become more efficient. So as I became vice chair, that's also another added load. So I probably have become even more efficient after that.
You have to.
Yeah. So, you just learn. But what's important is to still maintain enough that you're not just burning yourself out. So, that's one reason why I always bike into work, because that's a big stress reliever and just...
That was actually my question. Like, so since you did mention that, how then do you manage actually to maintain this balance between not burning out, but still like able to finish the things you want to finish?
So biking,
Yeah.
I guess, what is one of the things?
Right. So from an efficiency perspective, you spend, let's say, no matter what, you're spending about 20 minutes to get into campus, right? So you can spend that in a car, and maybe that is a stress reliever. You're listening to a nice radio program or something like that. For me, it's getting some physical activity as well as getting into work. So that's something I've done ever since I started. Actually, ever since I was a grad student, I've always biked into campus.
Nice.
All right. Well, we actually covered that part. I don't have any other questions in that, and I think we do have time to like one extra fun question.
Okay.
So, would you like to choose one of them?
Sure.
You have those, and you also have this one.
We'll do kind of continuing the health aspect. I'll do number 2, maybe. I can probably say something more about that.
Okay, so let me state it first.
So, what advice do you have for graduate students regarding balancing graduate school with their health?
So, I talked a little bit about like bicycling is something super important for me. So it's definitely important, both physical health and mental health. And, as vice chair, I see that it's very important and becoming more important now, because there's a lot more detriments to mental health now than there ever have been, I think, with, news media and just the flood of information that's at our fingertips now. So let's see. The question is advice. So I would definitely advise to have a blend. So really make sure. I mean, what works for me is making sure it's a habit, like it's built in, because it's easy to maintain a habit. It's harder to start one. But once you get started, it's almost easier to maintain the habit than to lay off of it. So that goes with mental health also, like, whether it's making sure to carve out times to hang out with friends, even if it's just like one dinner, like it doesn't have to be like you hang out for a whole weekend doing nothing, but even just like one dinner a week, like if you make it a regular thing, right? So it's always there supporting your mental health. I think that could be more important than having, a weekend blasts every 6 months where you're burnt out kind of in the 4 months in, and then you're just waiting to get that extra relief. It's like building it in where it's supporting you, every week is, I think is one thing I'd definitely recommend.